Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, drinking tall boys of Schlitz and trying to remember the chords to After the Gold Rush, or else a scrappy upstart, drinking White Claws and recording an acoustic version of I Took a Pill in Ibiza, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. What's up, you guys? It's the last Friday of August 2019. Thank you for being here. This month's episode is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Kyler that you found on Craigslist who drove a murdered-out Pontiac Aztek and smoked those weird Camel cigarettes that had like a flavor capsule that you would crush in the filter. And then Kyler would charge you like $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete immediately. But we don't have to do that anymore. We have Bandzoogle now. It's the future. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians from around the world, everyone from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch, social media integrations, plus two new tools that you can use. They have a commission-free fan subscription feature, and they also have a crowdfunding feature. Now, the crowdfunding feature lets you crowdfund your next project commission-free. You can take album pre-orders, bundle digital music with CDs and vinyl, report sales to SoundScan, and create custom merch bundles. Bandzoogle doesn't touch the financial transaction. All pledges from fans go directly into your account with no cut taken from the money that you've raised. That's pretty amazing, I have to say. That's really cool. Thank you, Bandzoogle, for that. Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, that's the initials of this show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, here's where I'll be: September 10th in Nashville, the 12th and 13th in Chicago for a pair of shows at the Hideout, September 14th in Milwaukee, the 15th in Eau Claire, 17th in Kansas City, 18th in Des Moines, 19th in Minneapolis, and then the 20th in Iowa City. After that, I'll be heading west in October 17th in Seattle, the 18th in Spokane, 20th in Bellingham, 22nd in Portland, 24th in San Francisco, and the 25th in Los Angeles. After that, I'll be touring Australia in November. I'll be in Sydney, Ashgrove, Mullumbimby, Melbourne, Castlemaine, Bentley East, a lot of different places. So if you live down under, look up my tour page and come on out. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Let's see what else. If you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a few things that you could do to help. Firstly, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows people to independently sponsor programs and content that they find meaningful, that they like. So you head on over to Patreon, you search for my name or The Working Songwriter, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month, the price of a cup of coffee, something like that, to help the show out. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. I thank all of the people over there who've signed up to do that already. And the other way that you can help out the show, if you like it, in a way that doesn't cost you any money, is to just leave us a review in iTunes, or tell a friend that you think would dig the show. The easy math on that is those two things would help me a lot more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. So thank you for all the people that have taken the time to do that. that is all the harassing I'm going to do of you for this month. I'm really excited about today's episode. I've been good friends with these two fellas for many years, probably a decade now. And over the summer, they asked me to come to the Catskills in New York to teach a workshop on songwriting at their first inaugural Sad Songs Summer Camp was the name of it. And it was a blast. While we were there, I sat down with them and grilled them for our show here. The students at the camp were listening to the taping live, so you might hear some laughs or groans, as it were, here and there in the background, and that's what it is. So thanks again to Kenneth and Joey, and I hope you guys dig this episode. My guests this month are the Milk Carton Kids, a musical duo comprised of Joey Ryan and Kenneth Pattengale. The pair originally began as solo acts, but eventually found one another in the burgeoning singer-songwriter scene based loosely around the Hotel Cafe in Los Angeles. It was a fortuitous meeting. In 2011, their breakout album, Prologue, landed them on a slew of critical year-end lists and launched them on to a national stage. They've toured extensively with bands such as the Punch Brothers, Old Crow Medicine Show, Robert Plant, and many others. They've appeared on Prairie Home Companion, CBS This Morning, and Conan. Their album, The Ash and Clay, received a Grammy Award nomination for Best Folk Album in 2013. Their most recent album also received a Grammy nod for Best Engineered Album. In 2014, they were selected as the Americana Music Association's Group of the Year. The Coen brothers tapped them to play in their concert documentary, Another Day, Another Time, celebrating the music of Inside Llewyn Davis, alongside Gillian Welch, Joan Baez, and Jack White. Their music was featured prominently in the Gus Van Sant film, Promised Land. NPR has said of their latest album that, quote, any darkness that seeps in is leavened, as always, by the sun-dappled beauty of two voices perfectly paired. And Pitchfork noted of their latest album, quote, in eliminating so many of the constraints they once placed on their music, they have already crafted the richest, most accessible songs of their career. Legendary producer T-Bone Burnett once said of them, you could miss hearing them if someone in the room is talking, but they're going to take over the world. We taped this interview last month in Big Indian, New York, and I'm grateful to Kenneth and Joey for taking an hour of their time to tell me about their journey so far. Take me to the place you both had music careers of your own going on. You even told me at one point you had like a whole record deal in your early 20s that like blew up on you in some spectacular way. What was that all about?
It wasn't a record deal you'd be envious of. I talked my way into a one-album license deal with Warner Brothers.
How do you even go about doing that?
Well, yeah, it's funny you should ask because that's like a way better deal than what anybody else would get because they didn't own it. I scored a movie for Warner Brothers in my mid-20s that was quite literally the result of being the neighbor of one of the producers on the film who kept a stack of my really bad solo releases on the editing bay of an animated film. And a few years after we met, I got a phone call that said, I've temped all of your music into this Warner Brothers animated, like German animated cartoon. Can we talk to you about scoring the film? Mm-hmm. And
so you say tempt. That means he wasn't planning on using that specific music. It was just like a placeholder for him at the time.
It was a she, and yes, mm-hmm. That was especially in animation. They rely heavily on temp music. They rely heavily on temp everything. There's temp animation and there's temp dialogue and there's temp music. They put these things together so piecemeal that they're constantly swapping out for the final product. And so, yeah, it was a lot of my music sort of defined the entire soundscape of that film. And so I was an obvious candidate for the job other than the part where the producers in Germany didn't really know they were on the line with a 25-year-old that had just taken 7 years to graduate college, decided to move back to his parents' house and build a studio in order to complete the job. Like, they thought they were hiring a professional.
Wow.
And little did they know they were hiring a crook. And at the end of that, in a really needy and lonely way, I was looking for support as a songwriter. And I like I mentioned, I had made, I think, until then, 4 solo albums, all self-funded or funded by my father, as it were.
Yeah.
And did it at home on various recording rigs I put together. That was a really lonely endeavor. And I didn't have the mind at all to be doing any shows. Over the course of those 5 years and 4 albums, I played 1 show in Los Angeles. But at that point, I started sending SOS letters, and one of them was to the head of the record label that put out the soundtrack for the Warner Brothers film. It made sense to me that this seemed like a big deal, and maybe I could command some sort of leverage as the esteemed composer of the international Warner Brothers cartoon. And funny enough, the response was in hindsight perfectly reasonable, though incredibly lucky. He said, yeah, call my son. He runs the US version of the label in Los Angeles. They mostly do soundtracks, but he works on some other projects. Call him. And I called him. And then my 5th record came out on Warner Brothers.
Under Kenneth Pattengale.
Yeah.
And where are you in your early 20s at this time? How are you getting started? Post-college, I'm assuming, or during college?
Yeah. Well, I didn't do anything until post-college. I think I probably wrote my first song when I was 21, nearing the end of college. And then started... I moved back to L.A., where we both grew up, with the goal in mind of being a singer-songwriter. But I had been, like I said, I probably wrote my first song a year before that.
Where did that dream come from? What was your paradigm that you had in mind? Who'd you want to be?
I had no idea. Honestly, I don't know. There was nothing there. In college I was playing. I knew how to play some chords on the guitar, and I had friends who liked to get high and jam on 3 chords for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and we would do that for like a year and a half. And at some point during that time, I had a breakup. And so then I had an acoustic guitar in my room, and so I would sit on the corner of my bed and write about how I was sad about my breakup.
Yeah.
I don't know where I got it in my head to write songs, honestly. I mean, I was not particularly musically obsessed or whatever, but it was just the way that I expressed my sadness and angst at that time. And then there was a little bit of an outlet for it because my friends and I were playing music, so I started bringing those songs into our jam sessions, and also we started playing at the local bar in college and at house parties and stuff. And so then all of a sudden we were playing my original songs. And essentially what happened was my friends in the band, who we all knew we were just doing it for fun until the end of college, they kind of had an intervention toward the end of college and sat me down and said, hey, I know we're all just doing this for fun, but these songs that you're writing are actually pretty good, and it would be sad if you didn't pursue it. And that was the first I ever thought for a moment about, not going to graduate school and trying to be a musician.
That's a really important moment to get from your friends.
Yeah. They were wrong, by the way. They were wrong. They were either very lucky or they were the most foresighted A&R people in history, because those songs were not good.
Yeah, you got to hear these songs. Oh, man.
Well, I mean, actually, Kenneth, you've never even heard them. You heard songs.
I heard the ones after them.
Yeah, you heard songs 5 years later, which were, those are questionable at best. But these ones in the very beginning. But anyway, my friends, they were, in the end, they were good friends. And except that they sent me back to LA on a total wild goose chase and mostly failing endeavor, because I went around LA playing shows and trying to make albums. I made some EPs and an album, and recorded with whomever I could get in touch with, and made a lot of friends and had a lot of fun, but like had literally nothing going on. 6 years later, when I finally met Kenneth, and which is when I think both of us found.
Well, nothing going. You didn't have nothing going on.
Well,
it wasn't going anywhere, but you had things going on.
I mean, it's very generous of you.
I mean, 6 years in with what some degree of nothing going on, that had to. Were you kind of were you heading towards a panic phase at that point, or were you still young enough to just be like, it's all good?
There was a panic phase 1 year in where I did actually consciously quit and start applying to go back to school. And then was rescued from that by a chance placement of one of my songs on a TV show, which led to the job which like funded my 20s, which was writing music for commercials. So like,
really?
Yeah, like little folky,
it's jingles for Wendy's. That's what he means.
Jingles for Wendy's. But
the one big successful thing I had was for Wendy's, but it was jingles for and it's not jingles in the way that you think of a jingle, but it's music for commercials. And I had a way of writing a little memorable thing with the guitar strummy and some whistles and snaps or whatever. And so at the time,
it sounds so bad just to think about it.
Well, unfortunately, my parents had kicked me out of the house, so I did have to do something.
Shots fired.
But it's how I funded my life in my 20s as I instead of being a waiter or whatever else I would have done to earn money while I was failing as a singer-songwriter, was to do that.
So wait, were you literally going into a studio to do this stuff, or did you have like a little home rig at home and then you'd send it off
to GarageBand?
In GarageBand?
Yeah.
And for listeners that don't know what that is, GarageBand is when you buy a MacBook off the shelf that's just boilerplate. What you're getting, it's a recording program that you're getting boilerplate when you buy any MacBook, and you're able to record like soundtracks for commercials or jingles for commercials.
If you saw a Wendy's commercial anytime between 2006 and 2008, you heard me whistling into my laptop.
You didn't even have a mic. It was the laptop.
No, I had a mic.
Okay,
yeah.
You had a mic, but it's still you whistling into your laptop.
Yeah.
And then bouncing it and sending it on over.
Yeah, and I actually on that one I did end up working to when it was really getting close to the end, because this was like a big campaign.
Yeah.
And when it was getting close to the end, I did work with one of the other composers who worked at the company that was, the music house that was actually getting these contracts. I was like one of their composers that they would call.
Okay.
So I did work with somebody in their studio and like sort of and fleshed it out.
Because it was a bigger campaign.
Yeah.
How did that work? Were you on salary versus what you would eventually make? Or
you would get they would get a bunch of jobs coming in, and they had a bunch of composers both on staff and also freelancers, and so they would send out the job to whomever they felt appropriate for the job, and you would send in demos, and you get like $150 for your demo, and then if you won the job, it was whatever the budget was from the client, and sometimes that would be a lot of money for a 25-year-old.
Yeah,
and sometimes it would be a lot of money for anyone.
That's great. That's a whole different world.
Yeah,
I don't even know about.
Yeah.
So that's how you guys made it through your 20s, and then when you met, you kind of met in a milieu. There was kind of a scene going on for singer-songwriters in Los Angeles in the late aughts, or whatever you call it, let's say from 2005 to 2012. What did the scene, who was playing in the scene at that time that you guys were both around?
It was like the second wave of the Hotel Cafe in Los Angeles, which there's like...
Our friends in that scene were like Joe Purdy, who ended up being integral to the start of our Milk Carton Kids career, and Carrie Brothers, who remains a good friend, and a guy called Buddy, who's a wonderful songwriter. Who else was around? Jay Nash.
It's a thing. Mika. It's like one day in the future, there's going to be very specialized encyclopedias. Not like there's going to be like a website that maybe links to all of these really deep dive Wikipedia pages, and somebody will somewhere like identify this 6-year period on Cahuenga in Hollywood, because for all of us there, it felt like we were about to be shot out of a cannon into the stratosphere, you know?
Yeah.
And for some of these people, they
But
had...
it turns out it was just sort of low orbit.
Yeah. But it's not completely unfounded a thought or silly a prospect, because just before that, out of the early 2000s hotel cafe scene came Sarah Bareilles and Katy Perry and Gary Jules and all these people that ended up having, like, people on the other end of this program might not recognize Gary Jules' name, but they'll remember that he sang
That version of Mad World.
Mad World and Donnie Darko. You know, like, everybody knows that because it was back in the times where these, like, indie syncs reached a high profile status, and also there was a lot of money to be made. There were people that were really taking purchase of this thing, and so we kind of came naturally into this same incubator that brought that about. But by the time we did it, it was the last time a major label wrote a big advance before the iTunes era decimated that. You know, now we're kind of back around where there's still in pop music lots of money and big advances, but you know, the end of an era is sort of exemplified in Ray LaMontagne's last giant advance from whoever his record label was.
Sure.
And so we were right on the other side of that line, and it was so for all of these people that we really thought we were a part of a thing and on the cusp of something that could take off the way our peers right before us did. And for some it did. I think it in the end, in hindsight, it was maybe the breeding ground for this weirdly defined middle class of musician that had a different definition 15 years ago because of the way that you could earn money and the way that you could make connections and make jobs. But here it's still, you know, all of those people, some people have fallen off, but I don't think any more than in any other eras. I constantly see all of those people putting out music and doing their gigs and doing their hustle.
By the time I played Hotel Cafe in, like, let's say 2008, because it was a thing if you were an out-of-town musician from LA. And the way that it would work, if you weren't from LA or New York, you'd go to New York and you'd showcase at Joe's Pub, and then you'd go to LA and showcase at Hotel Cafe. And you'd kind of get paid at Joe's Pub, but at the Hotel Cafe, you had to bring 100 people, and if you brought over 100 people, yeah.
Ooh, I remember when it was 25.
Okay, I think it was somewhere between 25 and 100. I can't remember. You had to bring a fixed number of people, and if you brought a fixed number of people, you got $10 for every person that came in. If you brought one person less than that number, you got $0.
Yeah.
And I remember whatever
that.
the number was. I remember I'd flown out from Chicago, and I remember begging the door guy because I'd sold 2 less than the thing, and I was begging him to let me buy the last 2, and he let me do it in the end.
Nice.
But
That was Dan.
What's that?
That was Dan.
That was Dan?
2008?
The door guy, Dan.
Not
That would've
James
been-
Babson.
Or James.
Well, one of those dudes hooked me up,
Great.
basically.
Both good guys.
And for you, in this period right before you met Joey, had you hit like a panic point yet with like, stuff's not taking off for me? Maybe I got to...
No, I was kind of on the upswing, as it were, or so I thought. I think what it was that I had constructed my bubble so well that I was peaking, you know?
I think it was the same for both of us. Probably, like, that's funny. I think it was the same for both of us, where, like, you know, there's always enough to keep you going. There was always enough to keep you going. But I do remember within 3 months of our playing music together, I remember thinking, oh, my head was really far up my ass about what was going on before. Because I started very quickly to feel like what it would feel like if something started to actually happen with our careers. And then I realized that the entire previous 6 years, every time I thought things were going well, I was kind of making it up.
So then explain to me, you had that feeling like, okay, something's happening now. This is different than before. This is taking off in a different way than it ever has before. Explain to me the specific signs that you were getting.
Yeah, people are coming to your shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people are answering your emails when you say, "Hey, I want to do this thing."
So
and
what's
they
a
go,
specific
"Yeah."
show? What was the first show that either one of you remember that you were like, damn, we just sold some hard tickets to people that we don't know?
Well, we did 3 shows. The first 3 shows we put on in our kind of hometown region was we put on a show at McCabe's in LA.
Are you talking Milk Carton Kids now? Or you want to know?
No, we're talking Milk Carton Kids.
Well,
This is taking off.
It's the year. There was a year between when we met and started playing together and when we were officially the Milk Carton Kids. And in that year is what I was talking about. Like we could feel it happening. And in that, sort of in a few months in, we did 3 shows, a show in LA at McCabe's, a show in San Diego at Lestat's, and then a show up in Ventura at a place called Zoe's, where all the LA people used to go up and play, although it's no longer there. But all of them sold out. It's 75 or 100 people at all of them. And that was way more than what we had done before. And just felt like people were excited to come to our shows all of a sudden.
Well, were you at a point yet where people were starting to know the songs and the words yet, or you hadn't put something out? You were just kind of a thing that was happening.
Just a thing that was happening.
That's cool.
Well, also there was a transitory period that I think shouldn't go entirely unnoticed, which is that the first thing Joey and I ever recorded together and the work that we did the first year we were together was a combination of prior solo material. We even have a record. We have a record called Retrospect, where half of the material is the best songs that I had before I ever met him, and the best songs he had before he ever met me, and we rearranged them for the duo. Mm-hmm. And so many of those early audiences, when you have 70 people coming to a club, you can recognize their faces. This isn't strange. These aren't strangers. These are people.
Plus, we're both from LA, so a lot of them were our high school friends.
Okay. Hey,
but actually, that was the big difference. Was like all of a sudden we don't know everybody at the show.
Yeah.
But so also in that moment, there are people that have been at events for the prior 3 years. There are songs that are not crowd favorites in that they're shoo-ins, but that when we're calling an audible on stage and we need to inject a certain piece of excitement, like we know that we can play Girls Gather Round because I've been playing that in front of my audience for 3 years, and they and we know that they aren't bored by it. We don't know that it's gangbusters, but we know they're not bored by it. And so I think if we were coming just out of the gate fresh, I don't know if that transition would have been as smooth. There was absolutely a lot of groundwork laid that when Joey and I decided to, do whatever we did, whatever we got ourselves into, there was a foundation there on which to build that I think is significant.
Definitely. That starts to build in Los Angeles, and then the first time that you guys came onto my radar that you were outside of Los Angeles, I was on a tour with my band, and we were in Boise, Idaho, and we had a night off. We were playing a place called the Neurolux the next night in Boise. I was really tired, so I went to bed. We were staying at the, what's the Red Lion Hotel?
Oh,
Remember those out west?
Yeah.
And it's the Red Lion in Boise.
Those are on the blacklist for the Milk Carton Kids.
Why? Oh,
those are below the threshold.
Oh no, you're crazy. the Red Lion in Boise.
The bedspreads are you can't abide. The best way to judge a hotel room on the road is you go on hotels.com and you peruse the pictures of their bedspreads.
Okay. And too much embroidered gold and you're out? Fair enough. That's what I thought.
Too much embroidered gold and you're in danger of communicable diseases.
Well, you got to just throw the bedspread on the ground when you get there. But so I'm staying at the Red Lion. I love this Red Lion because it has a hotel bar called Characters. And Characters is pretty much the best bar in America. It has these little tiny chairs that roll like office chairs, but they're only like a foot off the ground.
All right.
And it has a free make your own hot dog bar. And
you just roll around eating hot dogs?
Yeah, it's amazing. So that's where I was, and the guys in my band and my manager were like, there's a guy, Joe Purdy, playing at the Neurolux tonight. And so they went out and they came back and they're like, man, Joe Purdy has these guys like opening for him, and they're his band, and they're really good. And it was you. It was Milk Carton Kids. So you were doing a pretty extensive tour with Joe Purdy, correct, at this time? What was your first experience on the road like and the touring life?
Well, that was our first tour as the Milk Carton Kids. So after a year of playing together, Joe Purdy, who was our friend from the Hotel Cafe, invited us to open his 55-city U.S. tour.
55 cities.
55 cities, yeah.
There was a break in the middle.
There was a week and a half break in the middle, during which we recorded our album.
Well, but take me to the first half before you get to that.
So the deal was we were the opening act, but we were also his backing band.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up Kenneth ended up bringing about 8 instruments, including a pedal steel guitar and a pump organ and 4 guitars and a mandolin. So that with this trio that we did with Joe Purdy was me playing the bass,
wearing a funny little hat. He wore a little hat.
Yeah.
What do you mean a funny little hat?
Well,
I got pictures.
We both wore hats, and Joe and whatever. In any case,
don't ask about the hats, man.
Don't ask about the hats. There's plenty of pictures online of us in these stupid hats. But we were his backing band, and we did a trio, and all those instruments. The way that we traveled was Joe drove his own car around the country, and we had a rental car, and between the 2 cars we put all the instruments, and there was no one else on the tour.
It was a gray Nissan Rogue. Every cubic millimeter was filled.
Stuffed to the gills. Yeah. Two cars stuffed to the gills, driving around the country for literally 2 months straight, and we had 13, I believe, open channels, open microphones on the stage, which is a complicated sonic endeavor, especially when we were traveling with no tour manager, no sound engineer. So every day we show up, and it's just whoever the dude is at the Neurolux in Boise has got to manage this thing that they're definitely not used to managing. So we were overly ambitious on that front, and it was a hard, grueling tour. But then we were on stage for about 3.5 hours every night, because we would open the show and then would do the trio show with Joe, and that was the first thing we did as Milk Carton Kids. But it totally launched essentially our touring career, because what we did, which was smart, which I believe was Kenneth's idea, was we booked a 55-city headlining tour for ourselves in every single city that we were going to with Purdy, but like 6 weeks later. So we'd be on stage. He had every show sold out. It was 300 or 400 people a night. Mm-hmm. And we would go on stage and open the show, and then we'd be like, hey, we're going to be back in 6 weeks at the smaller venue across the street. You should come to that. So then when we did our first quote unquote headlining tour, when we were a band that literally nobody had ever heard of, instead of being 0 people, there was 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 or 60 people at a lot of these shows. That was like, that our first show. Yes. And so that was a huge national sort of head start or foundation that we had to our touring fan base, where we felt like, okay, if we go on tour a lot, there are these people there that kind of know who we are, and we can build it up.
Well, and another critical thing, besides the fact that you had a chance to build it up on that first tour, is you actually went for the headlining tour that early. I feel like some people can really get stuck in the mode of opening, and if you have a project that started and you get one good opening tour, I'm of the opinion that you just got to jump off the deep end and go headline to 20 people. 30 people, 40 people, because it gives you experience headlining, and people start thinking of you that way. Was that a conscious thing that you were doing to just go get it started like that, rather than do another opening tour?
Yeah, well, also,
I think it just made sense to you that you were like, we're going to be playing for 400 people every night. Like, we should go back 6 weeks later and see if we can get 30 of them to come to our show. We didn't know enough actually to think strategically about it like you are now, or like, having a decade in now, we would kind of be able to opine on that. But at the time, it just was like, we didn't know anything. We had no concept of that we should ever be on a record label or even have a manager or anything. We were just like, there's 400 people there. If we do a good job, 20 of them might come to our show later. Right. And that was, I think, as That was as far as I thought about it.
Yeah, well, it's consistent with another of my long-held beliefs, which has not been challenged to this day, I don't think, which is that a huge part of success in the music industry is straight up luck.
Yes.
Like
Amen
no
to that.
matter if you're Adele, it's still luck. There's somebody could have crossed the street in front of her on a day and slowed her up 5 seconds, and it could have meant that she never had a music career. Truthfully,
Yeah.
and I, based on my career,
Adele, all luck.
well, you know what I mean to say is I have close friends now that are infinitely more talented than I am that will never have careers in music because they're going to be unlucky.
Yes.
It's just how it goes.
I heard a great interview with Will Ferrell, and he was talking about Will Ferrell's dad was a saxophone player, strangely enough. And he said when he told his father that he was going to go into comedy, his dad said, look, this is like 98% luck. I just want to let you know that. So no matter how hard you work, if you get 5 years in and this isn't working out and you got to do something else, it's okay. It's not your fault. And he said that was a very freeing thing for him, where he was like, well, if it's just all luck, I'm going to let it all hang loose. And obviously, you look at those early years at SNL, those early films that he made after SNL, he was just fucking around, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it gave him a kind of freedom to know that.
Well, so to me, and I still feel, as it turns out, I think we're the beneficiaries of great luck, and I can point to some specific examples at a point. Well, before I get there, at the time, I think that just based on how things were going, and I guess just a world outlook, like I couldn't conceive of the reality in which we would be the lucky ones that way.
Right.
And so absent that, we had a good thing going. Like we got in a car pretty regularly and drove around California and ate In-N-Out and people clapped at us. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I'd been yearning
For the shows, not for the In-N-Out.
Right. That's what I'd been yearning for the previous decade, and here we were doing it.
Yes.
And then also we were making decisions that seemed to build on themselves in a way that we were entirely in control of. So when it comes time to ask my booking agent, who I inherited from Joey's solo career, when we decided to ask him to put together a run of shows that, like, on paper looks abysmal, financially, experientially, all of the above, I think that's just an expression again of, well, this is what we want to be doing. And, you know, a smarter person might have identified the heat we were getting and the pieces coming together and come up with a more strategic plan. But it's just, it was one foot in front of the other.
So now take me to those instances of luck.
Sure. We get, for some reason, the Grammys nominate us every time we do something. Why? Like, we didn't do anything really any different than a lot of the other people around us.
Yeah.
I think I know why. I think there's one guy at our first record label who sort of sent the submission at the right time, and it seemed to land in a place. The same thing's true. We booked a tiny NPR Tiny Desk concert back in the era where I think only 30 of them had been done, and they said no to a lot of people. And for some reason, well, I know why. Our first publicist, who was a baby publicist, she was the most passionate advocate for us, and she was building her career. She had cultivated a relationship with Stephen Thompson at NPR for years, and he had never said yes to her before that on Tiny Desk. He'd said yes to her on other things she had been pitching, but we happened to come along and give her a reason to activate the thing that she was really passionate and built. And, you know, still to this day, there's a percentage of the fans in our audience who are there solely because of that afternoon we went to DC and played that. And there's 5 more examples. There's a concert film called Another Day, Another Time that T-Bone Burnett and the Coen brothers put together that meant that for 2 months in 2013 we were on Showtime every night and playing, like, not in a promotional appearance. We were just doing our thing, teed up in the most favorable light, set in the right context for the people it would reach, and it was the international media for 2 months at a time. And that so happened to be in the same season as when Austin City Limits decided to say yes and broadcast a 30-minute concert of ours on every NPR network in America.
Well, these things also build on themselves, too. It's just like you get, like the ACL will say yes because it's like, well, they've done Tiny Desk and they've done this Coen Brothers film, you know.
And also, don't be mistaken that we're not, not that we didn't deserve them, but like we did good on those things. Like we earned our keep there. And I think that they were correct in shining a light on us. I think what we do is valuable and is inherently interesting, and we mean it, and we do it for the right reasons. But there's no reason to think that if they chose somebody else over us that we would have been slighted. Those people would have deserved it.
Right.
They just would have been the lucky ones. Instead, we were the lucky ones. And there's a million factors that go into that, and it doesn't take away our hard work or even why it could be good or valuable. But, you know, those things aren't a given just because you write a nice song.
This month's episode is brought to you by Lightning Rod Records, and more specifically, the new record from Paul Carton.
Roll up to the club in my 1964 Caddy Straight, ready to stunt at 1:45, just looking for fun.
Lightning Rod Records are old friends of mine. They put out 3 of my albums over the years. They've also put out albums by Jason Isbell, Amanda Shires, Billy Joe Shaver, James McMurtry. I mean, I think they got a pretty good track record there, if I do say so myself, of finding great songwriter talent. One of their latest signings is a fella from Texas named Paul Carton. He has a new album out on September 6th via Lightning Rod called Room 41, and this is the first single from it, Cocaine Country Dancin'.
Come on, let's get it going, only you can keep me rolling. At 2:45, you know what I need. Well, I'll twist for you, baby, hit a rip for you, baby. Take another shot, get lit for you, baby. Oh, hey. It's 3:45. Do we have any more? Cocaine, country dancing for you. Your cocaine, country dancing for you.
That's Paul Carton with his new single, Cocaine Country Dancing, from his forthcoming album, Room 41, out September 6th on Lightning Rod Records. Now, go over to their website or to Paul's website to pre-order a copy on vinyl or CD, or go into your Spotify app to pre-save the album for the day that it comes out. The lucky ones. I've struggled to clearly articulate that concept for years, and Kenneth really succinctly nailed it there. The lucky ones with a capital L and a capital O. It helps to know that. It helps to know how large luck looms in a creative career. It allows you to take things less personally. And when in doubt, it's always best to take things less personally. Of course, we're not the first writers to have this insight, far from it. Here's a brutal poem that gives that voice, from Charles Bukowski's collection, Burning in Water, Drowning in Flame. It's entitled, "The Difference Between a Bad Poet and a Good One is Luck." I suppose so. I was living in an attic in Philadelphia, It became very hot in the summer, and so I stayed in the bars. I didn't have any money, and so with what was almost left, I put a small ad in the paper and said I was a writer looking for work, which was a goddamn lie. I was a writer looking for a little time and a little food and some attic rent. A couple days later, when I finally came home from somewhere, the landlady said there was someone looking for you. And I said, there must be some mistake. She said, no, it was a writer. And he said he wanted you to help him write a history book. Oh, fine, I said. And I knew with that I had another week's rent. I mean, off the cuff. So I sat around drinking wine on credit and watching the hot pigeons suffer and fuck on my hot roof. I turned the radio on real loud, drank the wine, and wondered how I could make a history book interesting but true. But the bastard never came back, and I had to finally sign on with a railroad track gang going west. And they gave us cans of food but no openers. And we broke the cans against the seats and the side of the railroad cars, 100 years old with dust. The food wasn't cooked, and the water tasted like candlewick. And I leaped off into a clump of brush somewhere in Texas, all green with nice-looking houses in the distance. I found a park, slept all night, and they found me and put me in a cell, and they asked me about murders and robberies. They wanted to get a lot of stuff off the books to prove their efficiency, but I wasn't that tired, and they drove me to the next big town, 57 miles away. The big one kicked me in the ass, and they drove off. But I lucked it. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the office of the city hall, half asleep in the sun, like the big fly on my elbow, and now and then she took me down to a meeting of the council. And I listened very gravely, as if I knew what was happening, as if I knew how the funds of a half-assed town were being dismantled. Later, I went to bed and woke up with teeth marks all over me, and I said, Christ, watch it, baby. You might give me cancer. And I'm rewriting the history of the Crimean War. And they all came to her house, all the cowboys, fat, dull, and covered with dust. And we shook hands. I had on a pair of blue jeans. And they said, oh, you're a writer, huh? And I said, well, some think so, and some still think so. Others, of course, haven't quite wised up yet. 2 weeks later, they ran me out of town. When you go on tour that much, that Purdy tour into a headlining tour, it wreaks a fair amount of havoc on your personal life. Were you married yet at that point, Joey? Or
yeah,
dating?
I was newly married.
Mm-hmm. And what did your wife think of all of this? You just like, hey, babe, I'm going on the road for 6 months.
She was stoked. And not to be rid of me necessarily, but you know, she is the most. We got together right at the end of college, so she didn't know. She only ever knew me as a musician. She only ever knew me since I was like trying to be a musician, but she also knew me right at the beginning. We met like right at the beginning, and so she has watched and was there for like this entire 8 years of growth and failure and everything else, and was totally encouraging the entire time, and not ever once did she say the thing that I think a lot of people might say to their significant others, like, you know, haven't you had enough, you know,
yeah.
or when are you going to be done with all this? And
she
there was
says that now, but it's in relation to me.
You know, it's funny.
No, you know, yes, we can talk about the travel getting cumbersome, but no, at the time we were doing the travel, when we started doing the traveling, it was in a period of elation.
Right.
It was that we could. It was a privilege, and it was
Something
what we
was
had
happening.
both had longed for independently for almost a decade.
Also, mind you, Joey has very clear family values, and they're enviable, and I would argue they're wise beyond their years. But even in the beginning, as hard as we pushed ourselves, there was a acknowledged sort of hard and fast rule that there was a priority placed on coming home before being long. And at a certain point, it became a policy between us. We wouldn't miss the third weekend on the road. But, you know, on the Joe Purdy tour, obviously an exception was made. But still, with that in mind, I it certainly came to bear on relationships I've had in the same context, and I can't speak for them. I would argue they're still happily married, but I would guess that was a really key factor in maintaining some kind of balance at home.
Yeah, for sure. I think we Kenneth and I both felt from the beginning that like the goal was to be doing this forever. And so pretty quickly we were going to need to figure out how to make it sustainable. And yeah, going away forever was not going to be sustainable. So we have done certain things like, probably the earliest policy was don't miss the third weekend. And I know a lot of other people in music or show business end up having a policy like that where, in order to maintain sanity in their personal relationships and their marriages, relationships with their kids, eventually they have some sort of rule, second weekend, third weekend rule or whatever.
Yeah.
But also,
that was key.
Again, this is about luck. It's always about luck because here we are in 2011. And what band just starting off can decide to come home after 2 weeks on the road? You know what it is? It's the band that doesn't have any equipment other than they get their guitars and go on a plane.
True.
Yes, and it's a duo, so you're not buying.
If we're not a duo, we can't afford to just shut the whole tour down every 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, the burn rate on a rock band in 2011 is instantaneous.
It really,
it turns out, for an acoustic duo, it's still expensive even when you're making those decisions. But it's actually, when you look at the investment, you can say, I think the first year that we went and did all of that, we spent $80,000 and we made $20,000, and that was 112 shows that year.
Thank you, Wendy's.
Thank you, Wendy's. Thank you, Dave.
And thanks, Dad.
Thanks, Dad. Yeah, man. Yeah, I used to tour a lot. I used to do like 8 weeks at a time. And then when my wife and I started a family, we kind of went to like a 2-week model. And one time I tried to do like 3 weeks away from my kids, or at that time just my kid. And I was in Australia with BT, who you guys both toured with.
Came back, new husband. Kid didn't know who you were.
Well, no. Once I hit the third week of being away from like my family, and I was also on the other side of the world, it was just like, man, this doesn't feel natural to me. I just didn't like it.
What did it feel like?
It felt like I had abandoned them in some. And not only did it feel like I'd abandoned them, it felt like I'd abandoned them for something frivolous. I'm not holding a rifle in a war zone to protect our country. I'm not serving anything larger than myself. And there was certainly a way for me to make the amount of money that I was making, not having to be gone from my kids for like 3 weeks. So it was the combined that I felt like I wasn't there, and that I felt like it was comparatively frivolous, the reason that I wasn't there.
Well, I like that you checked yourself on you maintained your position and your charge, but you checked yourself on the stuff that felt excessive. Yeah. I think that's really, it's in keeping of the character of yours, I know, but it's also in keeping, in the context of this conversation, I wrote the record of yours we just made in the little liner note thing I wrote. I never fact-checked this with you or cleared it with you, but we had these conversations early, and the first time you and I ever met, you won't remember, was at your show at the Echo opening for Justin Townes Earl sometime in 2006 or something. But you and I at that time had it must have been later, 2008.
It would have been 2008 or 2009.
We had the entirety of our conversation was about the website Hotwire and your obsession with getting a deal on a hotel room.
Yeah.
And so as part of the anecdote I wrote for your album, which is true, is that I have always looked to you as being very creative and very resourceful. And I think a lot of people did look up to you in the hotel sense, but also the way that you released your first music, the way that you toured it, as being one of the sort of like leaders or upstarts of the early 2010s about how to figure out what a sustainable music career looked like without the support of the massive machine, or if you're going to try to launch your career as a combination of iTunes and hitting the road and scrapping together something that's meaningful. I've always considered you to be a sort of expert, if you will. And so I think when you talk about self-correcting for what your work life is compared to your home life, I've always found you to be a pretty responsible or thoughtful person on that front.
Well, thank you. And it's something that I've never really separated out, how to make a living from music with like the creative part of it. I think it really, different ways to stay alive creatively and make a living and still have a family. Like the different ways that I figured out how to do that have started to, the form has affected the content at this point in a way that I like a lot. I think it's fun to.
What else besides the podcast?
So I'm getting ready. I think the next big unexplored frontier for musicians that play their own music, and I think it's crazy that we're not in this space, is producing a lot of stuff for YouTube and really focusing in on, I'm basically going to do a couple shows on my own channel, and I don't need it to scale. What I've learned from this podcast is I don't need it to scale to a crazy number for it to help out me and the shows that I do and the records that I sell in a very meaningful way. Now, granted, I've set up my life in a way I don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to keep the whole thing afloat. I've never had a tour manager. My dad always told me, keep it skinny, Joe, keep it skinny. So I've always kept it skinny so I can do it. But I think I'm going to go into that space next. And so what the cool part about that is it's made me, for the last 6 months, I've been researching how to produce video content and edit it and put it together. And it's made me think about how I can do songs in a different way. You're doing that right now, writing for Live From Here. You're working in a totally different format.
That's true. Although that's very different from what you're talking about because, well, I'm not really going to be doing that next year in a much scaled back way, maybe. But that job is also super travel intensive. It is? Yes. It has been a touring show, and I've had to, it has doubled my annual travel over the course of the last year. But I am also very, Kenneth and I love playing music together. We love making recordings. We love playing shows. And it is, there's only so many days in a year that you can be in a club or theater, sleeping in a hotel or on a bus doing that. And I agree with you that one thing we've been also, I think, getting excited about is the idea that videos in themselves are a totally valid art form, and especially for live performance. I mean, how many truly meaningful, powerful, transcendent experiences have I had watching music on my computer with headphones in, live music, or discovering something new, or watching a concert. I mean, one of the best pieces of art I think that we've created in our career is a live concert film that we made. If we had made it 6 years later, we would call it a special. But at the time, we called it a concert film. Right. Because people didn't call them specials then. But
DVD, I call it a DVD.
Yeah, it's a DVD. It's a DVD. Hello. That's how old it is. But we made a thing, and we just filmed our show in Columbus, live from Lincoln Theater in Columbus, Ohio. Yes. And that sits on the internet. And the number of times people post a photo of themselves setting that up on the big screen at their house with a glass of wine and watching it, it's like, man, that's a totally valid piece of artistic contribution to make to the world, and we could be doing that a lot more than we are schlepping ourselves around the entire world for 90 minutes at a time for a few hundred people at a time. Mm-hmm. Not that we don't love doing that. I mean, it's still the foundation of everything we love doing, but yeah, I don't think it's, when we came up in a time when people thought of video content as auxiliary, ancillary, and in support of your other main business. But I think I have come to realize, I think, that it's a completely valid art form in and of itself. It's a way to communicate meaningfully with fans of music, listeners, other musicians, etc. The other thing I'm getting super into is camps.
Okay. Fair enough.
Folk camps are the future.
Folk camps are the future. Well, I think, particularly with you guys, the reason a concert film like that or a special, would resonate is your albums are missing the three dimensions of having the banter and interaction. It's like such a huge part of what you do. I remember talking to you, you told me the first time that you heard from Conan's producers that they were going to let you do like a little bit of a bit before a song, and how much that meant to you guys, because it really allowed you to basically put across your show in 3 dimensions over a medium rather than just live.
Not only that, it was a real vote of confidence in the sort of like the anecdote you say about Will Ferrell is when they came and said, hey, your song's short, why don't you talk a little bit before it? It was both extreme panic, because now you realize you're going to try to be funny on national TV. And then also, those are professionals. They wouldn't even let you do that if they didn't think you have it. Right. And so that immediately let the pressure off to go. I think when we did that Conan bit, Joey and I didn't speak to each other really before we went on stage.
Oh, no, yes, we did. Well, I like being in a position to give you a lot of credit for stuff, but this was all you. You don't recall?
No.
We thought about it all day, what we might do, to what we might say, or jokes we might make, or bits we might do before our song. We were going to play City of Our Lady. This was the second time.
Yeah, City of Our Lady.
We were going to play City of Our Lady off of our album Monterey, and they said, like Kenneth said, your song's short, why don't you do a bit or whatever beforehand? And we didn't have anything. We thought about it all day, and we didn't have anything. The same way whenever we try to write something in advance, we never come up with anything in terms of like comedy. And I was like, so we were about to go on, and I was like, let's just play the song. We don't have anything. And Kenneth goes, I'll never forgive you. Kenneth goes, we have to say something. They've given us this opportunity. Like, this is Conan. We're going to be on TV. They told us we get to do this. He was like, if you just try and start the song, I won't play. And so,
I said that?
Yeah.
Oh. Well,
dick. But we went up there and we just started talking, and just like it always does, we found something funny to have happen, and we went on too long, and it was fine because they're professional comedy editors, so they edited it to make it funny, and then we were funny on Conan, and that was it.
I want to end here. How do you, in a way that would be different from an intimate relationship with a friend or a partner or a lover, how do you maintain a creative relationship with a partner over a period of a decade or more?
you might have just caused an epiphany for me in this moment, because your implication is that you need some of the pressure needs to come off. Is that what you're saying? If you're being that intensely creative with somebody, if you're not together, there's like inherent to a relation. I don't mean sexually or anything, but in a relationship, there's so many factors where the tension is relieved just by the nature of your all-encompassing relationship. Joey and I don't really have that. The tension doesn't get eased. It gets eased when we're in real time on stage and we're being creative. And I think in some ways we're like dysfunctional druggies. We don't really ever confront our problems, but then we go do another hit. Yeah. And time keeps marching on, you know?
Do you feel the same, Joe? Are there techniques that you use to be able to work with a creative partner over time, or is it just completely a thing that you don't have to think about whatsoever?
Are there techniques that I use to stay sane while being in a band with Kenneth Pattengale?
Yes, that's a better rephrasing of my question.
I've developed a few.
Okay.
It's mostly denial.
Mostly
Right. Denial, distraction. In some way, so Kenneth and I have a relationship that's as deep and meaningful and fraught as any marriage or business relationship, or as far as I can tell, any other harmony duo that's ever been in American history. The big difference between some of the more notable harmony duos and us is that we haven't stopped talking to each other yet. They all did, whether they were related to each other or not. I think they all basically stopped talking to each other.
It's just a lifetime of
at
trying
some point.
not to go Phil Everly on the other.
Yeah. If we ever start doing shows at Knott's Berry Farm, you'll know the end is near. But I think that we play enough music together on regular enough intervals, and we write enough, we play enough, and we do this thing that we fucking love doing together, that we feel good at, is a way that we express ourselves in the most deep way we can and know how, and feels productive. And we fight through it sometimes, like literally we'll fight as we're creating stuff. But in the end, there's something deeply satisfying about what we're doing, and we care enough about each other, and to make sure that we can keep doing it, because in the end we love each other and we love doing what we do together. So
Thanks for being on the show today, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, could I say something to that too?
Yes. Are you willing to say something genuine now?
Never. No, I mean to say this very seriously, because I think it's particularly. I think the human experience, the way that your work defines you, and the way that your family defines you, and maybe when you're old, if you're that lucky and you look back on your life, I feel like the way that most people will want to be remembered is for their character and not so much for their accomplishments. And I find in a narrative that's already defined by so many turns of luck, there's another quite rare one that happened to Joey and I, which is that two people found each other who it's not so much that the things we do add together and create something that's greater. It's more like they complete some things that are incomplete. And for that to exist musically, and then to happen with somebody who is that you get along with on a emotional level and on a spiritual level and a personal level, that's a really rare and lucky thing to have in life. Most people spend their entire lifetimes trying to maintain one of those things, and we have sort of this both added burden but also added privilege to have that. And I think that you just have to decide what kind of person you are. Are you going to be a person that fights for doing the right thing and making the right and responsible decisions for yourself and for your friends and for your art, or are you going to be somebody else? And so I think just like in any of those other relationships you talk about, that's the challenge we face. And are you the kind of person that's going to honor how lucky you were and fight for that, or are you somebody who can take it for granted? So hopefully we keep fighting for that, because I think that's the kind of people we are.
Great place to leave it. Thanks for being on the show, guys.
Thanks, Pug.
That's our show for this month. Thank you for listening. This month's show was brought to you by Bandzoogle, built by musicians and for musicians. Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. The Milk Carton Kids' latest album is entitled All the Things That I Did and All the Things I Didn't Do, available everywhere digital music is sold or streamed. Today's episode was engineered and mixed by Matt Schusler. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and, most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.